So we're continuing to talk about the 5 forces or the 5 powers, and we're on number 3, which is a very un-Buddhist sounding force called the power of destruction. Very warlike. But here we're trying to destroy actually what is our main enemy, in a way, what underlies our enemies, which I think is our afflictions, but it's this self-grasping ignorance and the self-centered thought. And in the Mind Training Like Rays of the Sun text, it says, understanding their disadvantages, as were explained earlier in the context of exchanging self for others, we should try to give up disturbing emotions as the misconceptions of self, the self-centered attitude it gives rise to, and the inclination to neglect others by means of regret. So it's tying together in one paragraph these ideas that really all need to come together for us to overcome our self-centeredness. We can't get rid of our self-centeredness if we're neglecting others. It won't happen. And we need to get rid of the self-centered, self-grasping ignorance that underlies the self-centered thought. The self-centered thought is like the henchman that travels with the self-grasping ignorance. So to get rid of the self-grasping ignorance, we eventually have to meditate on emptiness. And to get rid of the self-centered thought, we meditate on the advantages of cherishing each other's. And so for me, it all comes together in that first verse that we do from the 8 verses of thought transformation, with the thought of attaining awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings who are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel, who will constantly practice holding them dear. So that's very much easier said than done. I did say it. So we want to, with this force of destruction, we want to destroy anything or counteract anything that gets in the way of producing bodhicitta. And so that's these self-centered attitudes that come up in us, the self-grasping ignorance, all the afflictions, and this inclination to neglect others. And I was surprised when I read that in this verse years ago when Venerable taught this text, or when she taught it, because I was thinking how much, wow, we really don't like to think of ourselves that way, that we neglect others. It's, but what is it that keeps us from being able, how is it that we get into that? I think a lot of it is that we're just so trapped in I want. And we're so within our own selves. And so it's interesting, within that you can see that the afflictions really are the enemy. And this is where in the Mind Training Like Rays of the Sun, it says, we should follow the training advised in the Guide to Bodhisattva's Way of Life, which is Shantideva, where he says, it would be better for me to be burned, to have my head cut off, and be killed than ever to bow down to my enemies, the ubiquitous disturbing emotions. So he gives us this really strong language to help to give us some kind of oomph. We need, it's both that afflictions are very serious. They're what really can run our lives and make us do all kinds of actions that harm ourselves and others. And it takes a lot of energy to overcome them. And so that's why we have to be really aware that the afflictions are the enemies. They are what take us into lower realms or into kinds of sufferings. It's not others, which of course where mind likes to go to blame. And we do these kind of meditations to really generate more strength. And so in the Lam Rim, you can say all this, but how do you get to this? And so, it's really all the way throughout the Lam Rim, they talk about looking at the advantages and the disadvantages. We just have to keep doing this again and again, moment by moment, day by day. So we want to think about what are all the disadvantages of having the self-centered thought. What are the disadvantages of having self-grasping ignorance? What are the disadvantages? What do they lead to in your life? Where does it take you? What is your experience? And so, when we can get our mind wrapped around this in the right way, it really gives us a lot of energy, because we see these things are the source of our suffering. And once we see that clearly, then we'll want to eradicate it. So, in my mind, this involves having wisdom, because it's very easy, even with these words, when you hear these words, to go more to some kind of self-denigration or self-reproach, because we always are dealing with this. Every day we deal with these afflictions. There's not a day goes by, hardly an hour goes by that they don't come up. And so we have to be able to, work with it, and eventually, by working with it, conquer it. So we have to have a kind of wisdom of looking at the advantages, the disadvantages, the results that come with a very clear mind. And so for me, that's part of the difficulty, is just getting to a clear mind. And so, everyone's different. For me, I have to really work to stabilize my mind so that my emotions don't just overtake it. And it's something that I'm quite aware of often. But I don't always remember it, till, sometimes I get away from that, and it's like, wow, everything just falls apart then. So for me, that's quite important. But through having a mind that's more clear, more steady, that can then focus on what we want it to do, then as we look at these things with that kind of clarity, then we can develop more certainty, and that gives us a kind of confidence. Instead, if we don't do that, if we just kind of muck around with this, it would be very easy to have these topics lead us to one of more like guilt, I think. It's very easy for our mind to fall there. We were raised this way. Being shoulded and all that, and we have it in our language, you're a bad person, even when you're a child, that's bad, we don't make the distinction between the behavior and the person. So we have to spend a lot of time working that out. So, although the cherishing others is the way to overcome the self-centered attitude, for me personally, it's what is more immediate to me is working with integrity and consideration for others, because those are the mental factors that I need just to build to get to the place where I can cherish others. And so it helps me to work more directly with the afflictions when I think about integrity. And Nagarjuna helps us with that a lot. In his verses on giving, he says, by focusing one's own mind, one gets over an absence of integrity. So that's exactly what's happening. When, for me, this verse is very helpful, because I've lost my focus, and the afflictions are running things, and then I'm not living the values I want to live. So integrity is a certain kind of respect, but it's a self-respect. And that's something that we have to keep building and really discern, really build that up so that we don't fall into, I'm sure it has near enemies that we probably hang out in a lot, like guilt. And then the consideration for others is this mind that really doesn't want to adversely affect others. Even if we don't cherish them, at least we should not want to harm, And so that, I think, is actually an easier place to get to for most people, that they don't want to cause harm. So in Nagarjuna's verse on giving, he says, by becoming aware of another's good qualities, one gets rid of an absence of consideration for others. So I find that to be very much the case, that I feel like a lack of respect for another person when I can't have consideration for them. And if I look at their good qualities, then it's easier for that to come on board. So I find these verses particularly, they work well for my mind. So with these kind of antidotes, since beginningless time, afflictions have been very prevalent, and we haven't spent as much time with the antidotes. So we're kind of pushing a rock uphill. Maybe a boulder is more like it. But we are creatures of habit, and so we can develop habits in a positive direction. And this is really familiar to us, anyone who's learned how to drive. It takes a lot of repetition to be able to drive. And you don't just, this is why we have a meditation practice. We do this on the cushion. We take this to the cushion so that we can get familiar with what we want to do in different situations. Like when you learn how to drive, you start out in a parking lot. You don't just get on the freeway and get clobbered. So it's we're careful what situations we put ourselves in. Or if you're like going to take a typing test, you practice. You get real smooth with it, and then it flows, right? But it doesn't happen without practice. And musicians really know this. When you're really well trained as a musician, you have to work on so many different levels of the mind to be able to perform well. And when you practice a lot, it's not just the motor memory of these things. There's a lot of different things that are coming into gear and then you can rely on that, and it helps you. And even a little bit of stress sometimes helps you. And so we can sometimes see that these kind of parallels in our practice where when we have practiced things, we have results. They do come around, and we see that we're able to do this. And so then the last thing that I thought was really helpful with this is, how do you know when you're making some headway with the self-centered thought? Because we need to have markers, really. To me, the last bit of time, I'm kind of a little disgusted with myself. And I see, I need to really step back because, when things are not going well and I'm not, in the kind of control I would like to have in my mind, this is where I'm not going the right direction. And so we have, it ebbs and flows. Our practices ebb and flow. It's just natural. It's like tides going in and out. There's no reason to kind of give up. It's just okay, bad month. Let's do something better here. But when you're making headway is when you can see that you're less angry, you're less attached, you're noticing others and their feelings more, you're more tuned into others and you're caring about them more and you're thinking about bodhicitta. And these things just make sense. And that verse is so much it, with the thought of attaining awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings. When you have that kind of feeling in your mind and you just can see even just the advantages of it and have some feeling of it, I think that's where we want to get. So let's take this as an aspiration and feel good that we have this as kind of our core motivation for the Mahayana practice. So